tariffs are starting to take a bite out of growth in China, maybe. Fixed in asset investments, such as spending on machinery and public works, slowed to its lowest level in nearly 2 decades. Retail sales rose 8.8% in July. That sounds high, but considering what we've seen in the past from China, it's below expectations. What does this all mean? Is the U.S. winning the trade war? Joining us is Derek Scissors, Asia economist at the American Enterprise Institute. He says both sides should just give up on negotiating a trade deal. Derek, good to have you here.
Glad to be back.
So consensus is that there's going to be a deal. They've got to get a deal. Everybody's interest is to get a deal. You don't believe that, right? Why not?
Well, a number of reasons. Number one, I don't think a deal that we made today, if we could make one today, would last into the 2020 campaign, where I think China is again going to be a big issue. Number two, on the Chinese side, they say publicly and privately they're very confused. They don't know what the U.S. wants. They don't consider the U.S. to be a very stable trading partner right now. And number three, on the American side, I mean, the one thing President Trump and Chuck Schumer agree on is bashing China. We feel like, trying to make deals with China for the last 15 or 20 years has not paid off for the United States, and we simply don't believe them when they promise us they'll be better in the future.
I was under the impression you were going to tell us that they aren't going to change their ways, that they've got a financial system and a political system that is built on certain things, such as using other people's intellectual property, state-owned enterprises that are going to be subsidized, and they don't have an interest in changing that. Is that part of your thinking as well, or no?
Absolutely. I think the Chinese would be perfectly happy to make superficial changes to appease the United States. But their innovation system relies on copying. It relies on theft. They have never permitted, well, not never, but in the last 20 years, they have not permitted their state-owned enterprises to face competition. So the idea that you can have free trade with China is false, because a large chunk of the economy is set off to the side. Those things are not on the table. They weren't put on the table when Xi Jinping took over, and he's probably going to be in charge for 15, 20 more years. So I don't see where the big gains for the U.S. come from in negotiating with China.
Increasingly, though, Derek, a bigger chunk of their economy is with companies that are not state-owned enterprises, the tech companies, for instance. And won't it come to a point where these tech companies, which have made enormous investments in areas like artificial intelligence, will have their own intellectual property that they want to protect as well? And so it will be in China's interest eventually, when that time comes, to actually protect patents and protect IP.
That's a fair argument, and it's one I made myself, 15 years ago. But meanwhile, we've seen American firms and American workers suffer while waiting for China to protect intellectual property. You also have the question of, when China has enough technology and enough IP it wants to protect, does it only protect its own IP and not anyone else's? So, when we get to the point where China is a good partner, I'd be happy to have the U.S. re-engage. A lot of people thought that was going to happen by now. It hasn't happened, and I don't see it happening in the next few years either. Why not wait until we see a better China before making a deal?
I realize that you're speaking sort of hypothetically with all that you're saying right here, but let me bring it down to a practical level where we sit today with these punitive tariffs in place. I mean, what do we do with that? I mean, all of the give and take, the tit for tat that's gone on over the last several months at this point, how do we reconcile that with what you're saying at this point?
Well, I'm not, I should be careful. I don't think China is a good economic partner, but I don't think tariffs are the right solution. Tariffs serve as taxes on ordinary people. I'd rather target Chinese state-owned enterprises. I think where we're going now on China, I don't mean to take us off track, but it's heavily influenced by where we're going today on Mexico. There's a lot of talk from the administration that a deal with Mexico is close.
Right.
If that happens, that's what the president will be out there talking about.
Maybe use that as a
blueprint. It'll be very hard to make
something.
a deal with China at the same time. Pardon me?
Maybe use that as a blueprint for other trade relationships?
Yeah, no, absolutely. If we can make a deal, it can be used as a blueprint for Europe, for Japan, and a lot of other partners. But I don't think the president wants to stand up, defend a deal with Mexico, and defend a deal with China at the same time. So a deal with Mexico pushes off a deal with China, and then I think we do get that next tariff tranche coming in September or October.
If, let's say, they follow your advice, we just give up negotiating a deal with China, what does the unwind look like? We just live with these tariffs, and you assume that we disengage? Do companies slowly but surely start to move their manufacturing, their production out of there because of higher costs, et cetera, because of the tariffs? What does that look like if we just give up?
Well, again, I don't think tariffs are the right way to go here, but we know what it looks like because, in 2002, U.S.-China trade volume as a share of GDP was 1/3 of what it is now. We're just going to go back slowly toward a world where China isn't the heart of most U.S. supply chains. So yes, companies will gradually move out of China. I think they're gradually moving out of China now because of higher costs. They'll move out of China because access to the American market is no longer guaranteed. So the world goes back in time to before the U.S.-China relationship was so important in global trade.
Okay, that would be fundamentally different than the way we've been thinking about everything for decades now.